Most people believe manipulation is something obvious, something loud, aggressive, easy to identify, but real manipulation almost never looks like control. It looks like care, attention, concern, and protection. That's why you don't notice it until it's too late. Manipulation doesn't enter your life by force, it enters by permission, slowly shaping how you think, how you feel, and eventually how you decide. At first, it feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels like someone understands you better than anyone else ever has. And that's the trap. The human brain is wired to trust what feels emotionally consistent, not what is logically correct. When someone repeatedly validates your feelings, mirrors your thoughts, and aligns themselves with your fears, your brain lowers its defenses. You stop questioning intentions because questioning feels uncomfortable, almost ungrateful. Over time, small adjustments begin to happen. You start changing your behavior slightly, not because you were asked to, but because it feels easier. You avoid certain topics, delay certain decisions, silence certain instincts. None of it feels dramatic. None of it feels wrong. That's why it works. Manipulation doesn't need to convince you of something new, it only needs to redirect what you already believe. It rewards agreement and quietly punishes resistance, not with anger, but with distance, silence, or disappointment. The brain reads this as a threat to connection, and connection is one of its highest priorities. So it adapts, it justifies, it explains away discomfort, and slowly, your internal compass starts pointing somewhere else. The most dangerous part is that during this phase, you still feel in control. You believe your choices are your own. You believe you are being rational. But what's actually happening is conditioning. Emotional conditioning works because it doesn't attack your logic directly, it bypasses it. By the time you sense something is off, the structure is already built. Your boundaries feel blurry. Your confidence feels quieter. And leaving feels harder than staying. That's when people say, I didn't realize it was manipulation until everything felt wrong. And they're right. Because manipulation isn't designed to be noticed early. It's designed to feel normal. Once manipulation is already in place, the brain doesn't ask, is this healthy? It asks a very different question. How do I make this make sense? This is where most people get trapped, not because they are weak, but because the human mind is built to protect emotional stability, even at the cost of truth. When something threatens a bond that feels important, the brain activates justification mechanisms. It reframes events. It minimizes discomfort. It rewrites memories. You start explaining behaviors that once would have felt unacceptable. You tell yourself they didn't mean it that way, that you're being too sensitive, that everyone has flaws. This isn't denial, it's adaptation. The brain prefers a distorted sense of safety over emotional chaos. That's why manipulation becomes invisible from the inside. Each small compromise feels isolated, harmless, but together they form a pattern. And patterns feel familiar. Familiarity lowers alertness. Over time, your emotional reactions begin to shift. What once triggered concern now feels normal. What once felt wrong now feels expected. The manipulative dynamic doesn't rely on constant pressure. It relies on inconsistency. Moments of warmth followed by distance. Approval followed by withdrawal. This unpredictability keeps the brain focused, alert, invested. It creates emotional dependency without the person realizing it. The mind starts chasing balance, trying to return to the version of the relationship that felt good at the beginning. And here's the crucial part. The brain confuses effort with meaning. The more energy you invest, the harder it becomes to step back. That's why awareness alone isn't enough to break manipulation. You can intellectually understand what's happening and still feel unable to act. Because manipulation doesn't control your thoughts, it controls your emotional priorities. It slowly teaches your nervous system what to fear losing. And once something is linked to fear, logic becomes quiet. This is why people often say, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't leave. The truth is, by the time you notice manipulation, your brain has already been trained to protect it. There is a moment that almost everyone who has been manipulated remembers, even if they can't describe it clearly. It's not dramatic. There's no big argument or obvious betrayal. It's quieter than that. It's a subtle internal pause where something stops aligning. A comment that feels off. A reaction that feels rehearsed. A pattern you suddenly see from the outside, and for the first time, your mind hesitates. This moment is uncomfortable because it threatens the story your brain has been protecting. When awareness begins, the brain doesn't celebrate. It resists. It creates doubt about the doubt. You start asking yourself if you're overthinking, if you're being unfair, if you're imagining things. That's not confusion. That's the mind trying to maintain emotional consistency. Awareness creates instability, and the brain dislikes instability more than discomfort, so it pushes back. This is why waking up inside manipulation feels disorienting. Your emotions and your logic stop working together. One part of you sees the pattern clearly, while another part feels anxious, guilty, afraid of consequences. You may notice that your body reacts before your thoughts do. Tightness in the chest, restlessness, difficulty sleeping. That's because your nervous system is recalibrating. It's no longer sure what is safe. And this is where many people turn back. Not because they don't see the truth, but because seeing it creates emotional uncertainty. Manipulative dynamics thrive on certainty, even false certainty. This is why manipulators often escalate subtly at this stage, not with control, but with confusion, mixed signals, partial apologies, moments of clarity followed by regression, just enough to make you doubt your perception again. And when that happens, people don't say, "I was manipulated." They say, "I don't know what's real anymore." That's the deepest level of control, not telling you what to think, but making you unsure of your own judgment. By this point, the mind is exhausted, and exhaustion makes familiarity feel comforting again, even if it hurts.
Leaving manipulation rarely feels like freedom at first. It feels like losing something essential. This is the part most people don't expect, and it's why so many stay longer than they should. By the time manipulation is fully recognized, it has already blended with your sense of identity. Your routines, your emotional responses, even your self-image have adapted around it. So when the idea of leaving appears, the brain doesn't register it as escape. It registers it as danger. Not because the situation was safe, but because it was familiar. The human mind equates familiarity with survival. That's why stepping away can feel like stepping into nothing. There is grief, not just for the relationship or situation itself, but for the version of yourself that existed inside it. This is where the final trap lives. The brain whispers that leaving means admitting everything was wrong, that all the effort was wasted, that you misjudged reality, and the mind hates that idea. So it delays. It negotiates. It waits for one last sign that things can return to how they were. But manipulation doesn't end with clarity. It ends with distance. Real distance. Emotional distance. Nervous system distance. When that space begins to form, something important happens. Your thoughts slowly regain volume. Your body relaxes in moments it used to tense. You start noticing how quiet feels different now. Not empty, just unfamiliar. And that's the truth most people never hear. Healing doesn't feel good immediately. It feels neutral. It feels silent. It feels like the absence of constant emotional noise. And the brain, at first, mistakes that silence for loss. But silence is not absence. It's space. Space to rebuild your internal reference point. Space to trust your reactions again. Space to feel discomfort without explaining it away. The moment manipulation truly loses its power is not when you confront it, and not when you understand it intellectually, but when your mind stops organizing itself around it, when you no longer measure your choices against someone else's reactions, when your nervous system stops waiting for approval or punishment. And that's why manipulation is only noticed when it's too late. Because noticing it early would require trusting your discomfort before you trust familiarity. And most people were never taught to do that. The real lesson isn't how to spot manipulation in others. It's learning to respect the moments when something feels off, even if you can't explain it yet. Because awareness doesn't start with clarity. It starts with discomfort. And discomfort, when listened to early, is the mind protecting itself.